My name is Teresa G. Mabry, and I'm 30 years old. My boss promoted his stepdaughter over me, then acted like I was supposed to smile and thank him for the privilege. When I refused to do her job on my way out, she threatened me with, "Daddy's going to handle you personally," like I was a misbehaving employee in her house, instead of a professional who'd kept their entire region from collapsing. So I gave them exactly what they asked for and nothing more. I spent 6 years building a regional food distribution network from a complete disaster into something that actually functioned. I fixed a routing catastrophe that had cost the company close to $180,000 in penalties. I personally saved 4 major restaurant chain accounts that were ready to jump ship to competitors. Every annual review came with the same promise, delivered with the same corporate smile, that I was being groomed for regional operations director, that I just needed to wait for the right timing. I believed them, not because I was naive, but because my work backed it up and the metrics always told the truth, even when people didn't. Then came Thursday morning. Vincent called a mandatory meeting at 8:30 a.m., Conference Room B, 23 people packed in shoulder to shoulder like we were about to witness something important. Vincent stood at the head of the room in an expensive suit and a fake confident smile, remote in hand, eyes sweeping the room but never landing on me long enough to acknowledge what everyone knew. He clicked. The first slide appeared. New Regional Operations Director, Tiffany. Tiffany, Vincent's stepdaughter, different last name, same shortcut. The same Tiffany who started 3 months ago asking me basic questions about how cold chain logistics worked. The applause started immediately, that automatic corporate clapping where nobody's actually happy, but everyone knows they're supposed to perform. Tiffany stood up 2 rows behind me with a rehearsed smile like she'd practiced it in a mirror. Vincent said Tiffany brought fresh perspectives and strategic vision, looking around the room but never at me. Fresh perspectives meaning 3 months of experience in an industry she'd never worked in before. Then he added my name like an afterthought. He said I'd been instrumental in supporting Tiffany and helping her get oriented. Supporting, not leading, not rebuilding the region from scratch, just supporting. The meeting ended. People lined up to shake Tiffany's hand. I gathered my folder slowly and stood up last. Janet caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "Are you okay?" I nodded once. Drew, my coworker in operations, who'd been here almost as long as me, stood near the door with his jaw tight, looking back at me like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find words that wouldn't get him in trouble. Within 10 minutes, an HR email appeared, time-stamped 7:45 a.m., before the meeting even started. Subject line, updated reporting structure, effective immediately. My name was listed under Tiffany's as Senior Distribution Coordinator. They demoted me in everything but title and didn't even have the guts to tell me to my face first. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling something settle in my chest that wasn't rage, not yet, just clarity, the kind that makes your next move obvious. By 4:15 p.m., I printed 1 page, knocked on Vincent's office door, and placed the envelope on his desk. This is my 2 weeks' notice. He actually laughed. He told me I was being emotional, told me to sit down so we could talk through it. I stayed standing. I told him he decided my future without including me, and I was accepting reality now. His expression shifted fast, from dismissive to serious, and he told me to think carefully, that stability mattered at this stage of my career. Code for, you need this job more than we need you. I told him I'd complete the standard transition, 2 weeks. He looked relieved before he could hide it. He thought my notice meant I'd spend 2 weeks being a good employee and making this smooth. What he didn't realize was that compliance and cooperation are very different things, and I was done giving away the parts of my work they never respected. Friday morning, Tiffany stopped by my desk like she owned the air around it. She wanted a hands-on walkthrough, wanted to shadow me for a few days and dive deep into my systems, the way someone asks for a tour of a house they didn't pay for but plan to live in. I told her the documentation was in the shared drive, system access protocols were in the same folder, contact lists were in the CRM, and every workflow map was labeled clearly. She shifted her weight and smiled like she was trying to keep the mask in place. She said she was hoping for something more hands-on. I told her that wasn't part of my transition responsibilities. I told her she had 2 weeks to review documentation and ask specific questions. Her smile tightened. She said she thought Vincent would want me to be more collaborative. I said Vincent could clarify expectations if they were different from what I understood. 5 minutes later, Vincent called me to his office. Tiffany was already there, sitting with her hands folded like she'd just been comforted about something. Vincent told me Tiffany was in charge now, and I needed to support her transition fully. I told him I was providing documentation and answering questions. He said she needed more than that. She needed my active cooperation. I told him I submitted my notice and I wasn't training my replacement beyond what was professionally required. Vincent's face went red. He said that was insubordinate, like I owed him loyalty after what he just did. His voice rose just enough that 2 people walking past his office slowed down. I didn't move, didn't blink, let the word hang there between us until the silence started to hurt. Then I told him no, that wasn't insubordination, it was accuracy. I was fulfilling my notice period, nothing more. He threatened my references. I shrugged and told him anyone who called would hear about my actual work performance. I walked out before he could respond, then sent him an email summary of the conversation within 10 minutes, time-stamped and clean. That afternoon, I documented exactly what I was contractually required to document. Process workflows, system architecture, account hierarchies, emergency procedures, escalation ladders. What I did not include was the 100 judgment calls I made every week that kept things running. The vendor relationships built on years of kept promises. The client preferences I had memorized. The instinct for where a problem would show up before it showed up. You can't document intuition, and you can't hand over earned trust like it's a spreadsheet. Tiffany scheduled 3 meetings for next week, all labeled shadowing session, with time blocks long enough to pretend she was doing real work. I declined all 3 with the same message. Please reference documentation and shared drive, available for specific questions via email. She showed up at my desk 20 minutes later, voice louder than it needed to be, asking why I was making this difficult. She said she was trying to learn. I told her I was providing what was agreed to. If she needed more than that, she could take it up with Vincent. She leaned in closer, voice dropping but still audible, the way people talk when they want everyone to hear but want plausible deniability. She told me to keep the attitude up, and Daddy was going to handle me personally. The entire floor heard it. Janet stopped typing 3 cubicles over. Drew's eyes went wide from across the room. 2 interns at the copier froze mid-conversation. Someone set a coffee mug down with a hard thud, like punctuation. Tiffany realized what she'd said. Her face went red and she backed up half a step like she expected me to flinch. I didn't. I just went back to typing without giving her the reaction she wanted. Janet appeared at my desk minutes later and told me she heard it. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She glanced toward Tiffany's office and said that was inappropriate. I said a lot of things were inappropriate. She dropped a small Ziploc bag of cookies on my desk, like she was slipping me contraband in a war zone, then told me she was documenting what she heard. 10 minutes later, a Teams message popped up from Tiffany in the group chat. She wrote that insubordination during transition would not be tolerated, and that her dad takes these situations very seriously. I screenshot it and forwarded it to my personal email. Then I saved it again in a folder labeled Receipts, because by then I wasn't even angry. I was just collecting. That evening, I told my boyfriend about it over takeout. I gave him the full rundown. The promotion that should have been mine, the stepdaughter with no experience, the demand for free labor on my way out. He set his fork down slowly and stared at me with that careful expression people use when they think they're being wise. He said I was burning bridges. He said people were going to remember how I handled it. He said from the outside it looked bad, like I was walking away right when someone needed help, and that everyone would say I was bitter. It hit me like another demotion. Same pattern. Vincent rewrote my 6 years as support staff. Tiffany rewrote my boundaries as sabotage. Now my boyfriend was rewriting my refusal to work for free as unprofessional. Everyone needed me to be the problem, so their version could make sense. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and told him I wasn't doing this. He asked what I meant. I told him I wasn't dating someone who rewrites reality to feel better. I left before he could turn it into a debate. The next morning, I got my stuff from his place while he was at work. I muted his number that afternoon. My life was already full of people trying to tell me what I owed. By Tuesday, the first cracks started showing at the office, and I could feel it before anyone said it out loud, because systems don't like being run by people who don't understand them. They start resisting, quietly at first, then loudly. By Tuesday afternoon, the delays stopped being theoretical. A vendor approval that usually took me 10 minutes sat in Tiffany's queue for 6 hours. By the time she figured out how to route it properly, the supplier had already bumped the order to the next delivery cycle. That one decision cost the company $2,800 in expedited shipping fees, and nobody even noticed right away. That was the dangerous part. When a system starts failing quietly, leadership always assumes it's fine. Then a restaurant chain account in Colorado called with a capacity issue. They needed to increase their weekly order volume by 30% starting next month. Standard request. I would have confirmed warehouse capacity, adjusted routing, negotiated pricing with the supplier, and locked it down by end of day. Tiffany scheduled a discovery meeting. The client emailed back asking why a simple capacity increase needed a meeting. Vincent forwarded that email to Tiffany with a single line. Please handle. Wednesday afternoon brought a food safety recall notice. Routine, but time sensitive. Identify which accounts received affected batches, notify them immediately, arrange returns and replacements, document everything. It usually took me about 2 hours start to finish. Tiffany stared at the notice like it was written in another language. She came to my desk and said she needed help. I told her the documentation was in the shared drive under emergency procedures. She said this was serious, that people could get sick. I told her that was exactly why she should have familiarized herself with emergency protocols already. She asked me if I was really going to let people get sick just to prove a point. I stood up and told her I wasn't letting anything happen. She was the director. She needed to direct. Vincent appeared behind her and asked what the problem was. I pointed to my screen and explained the recall documentation step by step. Vincent turned to Tiffany and asked if she could handle it. She said she could, but it would be faster if I helped. Vincent walked away, telling her to handle it. 20 minutes later, Vincent stormed back and told me to coordinate the recall. He called it a direct order. I opened the emergency procedures document and turned my screen toward him. Everything was there. Tiffany had the same access. I told him she could follow the protocol, or he could admit she wasn't qualified to run operations. He said I was putting people at risk. I told him I wasn't signing off on anything that broke compliance. Period. The protocol was clear. She had authorization, system access, and documented procedures. The recall officially started at 2:30 p.m. Tiffany spent the next 4 hours fumbling through it, made mistakes, had to redo notifications, missed 2 accounts in the initial sweep. I wasn't going to touch the process, but I wasn't going to let a safety notice slip past deadline while my name was still on the org chart. When I saw the missed accounts in the system, I flagged it to Vincent. He made her fix it. What should have taken 2 hours dragged until almost 7. Several clients complained about delayed notifications. Thursday afternoon, the Colorado client called Vincent directly. They were upset, asking why the capacity request had been sitting for 4 days. Vincent pulled both of us into his office and demanded to know what was going on. Tiffany pulled up a project timeline she'd created with phases and milestones. Vincent asked how long it would have taken me. I told him 4 hours, maybe 6 if there were complications. His jaw clenched. He told me to do it. I told him it wasn't my account anymore. Tiffany was the director. She decided how to handle it. He paused, trapped. If he ordered me to take over, he admitted Tiffany couldn't do the job. Tiffany jumped in and asked me to handle it just this one time. I told her I was fulfilling my notice obligations. This wasn't one of them. The documentation was all there. She needed to use it. Vincent's face went purple. He said it was insubordination. I told him he promoted her. That included the problems. The Colorado account took Tiffany another 3 days. By the time she sorted it, the client had already started talking to competitors. Vincent had to personally call to smooth things over. It didn't work. They reduced their order volume by 15% the following month. Nobody said my name out loud, but everyone knew where the rot started. By the end of the week, efficiency was down across the board. Small issues that used to get handled in hours now took days. Decisions bounced between people who didn't want ownership. Clients noticed. Vendors noticed. Drew started keeping a tally on a whiteboard in his office. Problems this week? 14. Problems last week? 6. Problems when Teresa ran things? 2. He erased it whenever management walked by, but everyone had seen it. I kept my head down. I answered emails. I declined meetings. I watched the machine grind against itself and understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't sabotage. This was gravity. And gravity doesn't care who your dad is. Monday started with Vincent trying a different angle. He called me into his office first thing. No Tiffany this time. Just him with his concerned manager face on, like we were about to have an adult conversation. He talked about my 6 years invested, benefits, retirement matching, stability, all in the past tense. He told me not to be dramatic. He said I was a valuable employee, and maybe we could work something out. I told him I was open to offers. His eyes lit up like he'd finally found leverage. He suggested creating a senior advisor role, autonomy, strategic input, technically reporting to Tiffany, but collaborative. I asked if I'd still be reporting to her. He didn't answer. That was my answer. I told him no. He tried for another 15 minutes. Retention bonus. Revisit the director role in a year. Hinted that Tiffany might not work out and I could step back in. None of it changed the core problem. They had already told me exactly what they thought I was worth. No amount of backpedaling would erase that. By Tuesday, the problems had names and dollar amounts attached to them. A vendor called about a delayed shipment. Tiffany took the call on speaker with her office door open. Half the floor could hear. The vendor needed resolution that day. Tiffany's tone sharpened, and she said if they couldn't accommodate the timeline, her dad was going to have a problem with the delay. Dead silence. She hung up fast. Drew appeared at my cubicle 30 seconds later, eyes wide, whispering that she'd just pulled the daddy card on a vendor. That vendor was going to tell every other vendor they knew. A routing error I would have caught in planning made it all the way to execution. Wrong truck, wrong warehouse, extra day, and $1,400 in corrections. A pricing approval sat unanswered for 3 days because Tiffany didn't understand the margin structure. The client called Vincent directly, upset and demanding answers. A client portal access request took a week instead of the usual same-day turnaround because Tiffany scheduled meetings to understand the security protocols. Meetings to schedule meetings became the norm. Wednesday afternoon, Tiffany called a team meeting and announced a new vendor evaluation system. Monthly performance reports with specific metrics, accountability, driving excellence. Drew raised his hand and asked who was going to collect and process all that data. Tiffany said it was an implementation detail they'd work out. Drew asked how vendors were supposed to do extra work without knowing who would use it or how. Tiffany said it was about accountability. Drew glanced at me. I kept my face neutral. After the meeting, Drew cornered me by the coffee maker and said that system would last 2 weeks tops. I told him that was generous. He laughed and asked if I thought she had any idea what she was doing. I said she was used to environments where ideas mattered more than execution. This wasn't that environment. Vincent started getting sharper. More emails. More, "Why isn't this done?" messages, without understanding what this actually was. He tried blaming me openly in one meeting, said I was undermining Tiffany since day one. I told him I'd done exactly what I said I'd do, documentation and specific answers. If that wasn't enough, then the job required more than he was willing to admit. He told me to leave the meeting. I left, went back to my desk, logged out, grabbed my jacket, and went home 2 hours early. Nobody stopped me. Drew texted 20 minutes later saying Vincent was losing it in there, blaming everyone except himself and Tiffany. I replied that it wasn't my circus anymore. By Thursday morning, my system access had been downgraded. I couldn't approve anything anymore. Vincent's attempt to force me into pure support mode did the opposite. People came to me with questions, and I told them to route through Tiffany for approval. Tiffany got overwhelmed. Things stalled. I kept my head down and counted the days. The numbers told the story before anyone wanted to hear it. On-time delivery was down. Retention was sliding. Response times stretched. The region that used to run on muscle memory now limped along on meetings and excuses. Vincent could point fingers all he wanted, but the performance graph didn't care. It kept falling, and every drop made the truth harder to ignore. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was just no longer absorbing the consequences of decisions I didn't make. And for the first time, everyone else had to feel the weight I'd been carrying alone. Tuesday morning brought the quarterly business review, the kind of meeting everyone pretends is routine, even though careers quietly live or die inside it. Vincent had been preparing for weeks, slides polished, talking points rehearsed. The conference room filled early, regional managers lining the table, Vincent at the head, Tiffany seated beside him like proof of a decision already made. The CEO and 2 corporate executives appeared on screen from headquarters, faces neutral, cameras on, not smiling. Tiffany started the operations overview. The first slides were safe: regional footprint, head count, high-level structure. Then she hit performance metrics. On-time delivery down 15% over the last quarter. The CEO's expression shifted instantly. "That's a meaningful drop," he said. "What's driving it?" Tiffany hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice, then said they were in a transition period, implementing new processes. Vincent jumped in smoothly, said it was temporary, part of a strategic evolution. The CEO didn't nod. "Show me customer retention," he said. Tiffany clicked to the next slide. Retention rate 88%, down from 96 the previous quarter. Nobody spoke. 8 points in 1 quarter wasn't a fluctuation, it was hemorrhage. Drew, sitting near the back as support staff, caught my eye and looked like he might actually pass out. "That's an 8-point drop," the CEO said. "What happened?" Vincent opened his mouth, but Tiffany spoke first, voice unsteady, saying they'd had some personnel transitions. The CEO leaned forward slightly. "Your predecessor left. When?" 2 weeks ago. Tiffany nodded, still not understanding where this was going. The CEO's voice sharpened. Then who was running operations when performance declined? Vincent's face drained of color. He said the decline occurred during the transition planning phase, when he was preparing Tiffany's succession and I was still running day-to-day operations. The CEO went very still. "Let me understand this. Your top performer was running operations while you planned to replace her with someone who had never worked in this industry. During that planning phase, performance dropped. Then you made the replacement. Is that accurate? Vincent didn't answer. Silence answered for him. So you replaced someone during a performance decline. Based on what metrics? Vincent said it was part of a planned succession strategy. The CEO asked which metrics supported that decision. No one spoke. Vincent mentioned Tiffany's strategic experience from corporate. The CEO turned to Tiffany. How long have you worked in food distribution? She hesitated, then said this was her first role in the industry. The CEO said, "Turn your camera off." The screen went black, but his voice stayed. Vincent, I'm going to be direct. Your region was top performing. Now it's bleeding customers and missing delivery windows. You replaced your operations lead with someone unqualified during a critical period, and you're calling it strategy. I want a full operational audit. I want a customer retention plan, and I want to know who approved this decision and why. The call ended. Chairs scraped back immediately. Regional managers gathered their things fast, nobody wanting to be the last one in that room. Vincent sat frozen. Tiffany looked like she might throw up. Drew stood up and left without saying a word. I followed him into the hallway. Holy hell, he said once we were out of earshot. Yep. Did you know the numbers were that bad? I knew they'd dropped, didn't know how much. 5 minutes later, Vincent stormed past us without looking at either of us. Back at my desk, I checked my personal email. 2 responses from companies I'd interviewed with. Both wanted second-round discussions. One was a direct competitor with a regional vice president role open. Better pay, clear authority, actual respect for experience. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was my ex-girlfriend, long and apologetic, ending with, "Can we talk?" I deleted it without replying. Janet from accounting stopped by mid-afternoon. That was bad, she said quietly. Worse than bad. You know Vincent's going to try to blame you. Probably. She showed me her phone. She'd submitted an ethics complaint that morning about Tiffany's threat and Vincent's behavior. Someone had to document it, she said, and if they tried to pin this on me, there needed to be a paper trail showing why I left. By 3 o'clock, Vincent called a mandatory leadership meeting. Tension thick enough to taste. He talked about stabilizing, focusing on excellence, no excuses. Drew asked if they were going back to the old processes that worked. Vincent snapped that they weren't going backward. Drew asked, what if the new system was the problem? Vincent called that negativity. I spoke then, calm, clear. The numbers speak for themselves. 8% retention loss, 15% drop in on-time delivery. Those aren't transition bumps. Those are structural failures. Vincent turned on me and said I was the structural problem, that I'd been undermining Tiffany since day one. I told him I'd done exactly what I said I would, documentation and answers. If that wasn't enough, then the job required more than he was willing to admit. He told me to leave the meeting. I did. Logged out, grabbed my jacket, went home 2 hours early. Drew texted later saying Vincent was losing it, blaming everyone except himself and Tiffany. I replied that it wasn't my circus anymore. The audit was coming. The truth was already written in the numbers. All that was left was for leadership to read it out loud. Thursday morning, I came in to find my system access downgraded. I could view dashboards but not approve anything, couldn't route vendors, couldn't finalize pricing. Vincent's last attempt at leverage. What it actually did was make my final days effortless. People still came to my desk with questions out of habit. I told them to route everything through Tiffany for approval. They did. Tiffany got buried. Decisions stalled. The region slowed to a crawl. And for the first time, nobody could pretend it was subtle. Around 2 p.m, Tiffany appeared at my desk, looking nothing like the polished executive she'd presented herself as. Her blazer had a coffee stain on the sleeve. Her hair was pulled back too tight. She asked if we could talk privately. We went into an empty conference room. She closed the door and sat. I stayed standing. She said she needed my help with everything. Accounts were confused, vendors were pushing back. Vincent was furious. She said I was sitting there watching it burn. I told her I had provided documentation and answered questions. She said she wasn't ready. She said they probably should have given me the role. Then she asked why I wouldn't help her now. I told her help meant doing her job for her, and I wasn't interested in that arrangement. She wiped her eyes and asked if I was really going to let the whole region fail just to prove a point. I told her I wasn't letting anything fail. I was just no longer preventing it. She said that was the same thing. I told her it wasn't. She left without another word. An hour later, Vincent summoned me, his final attempt. He told me to name my price. He offered to double my retention bonus, offered a senior director title. I asked if I'd still be reporting to Tiffany. He didn't answer. That was enough. I told him he had 6 years to give me what I earned, and he gave it to someone else. Now he wanted me to fix his mistake for more money? That wasn't how it worked. He told me I'd regret this. I told him he already had. Friday was my last day. I came in at 8 like always, finished the last of my documentation by noon, logged out of every system, turned in my badge and laptop, packed my desk. No goodbye lunch, no speeches. People stopped by quietly to shake my hand and wish me luck. They knew what was happening, even if they couldn't say it. Vincent never left his office. Tiffany caught me by the elevator with my box of personal items and said she hoped I was happy with myself. I told her I wasn't happy or sad. I was done. She said I sabotaged her. I told her I stopped carrying her. It felt the same to her. It wasn't. The elevator doors closed. Drew was waiting in the parking lot. End of an era, he said. Beginning of a new one. I drove away without looking back, already knowing the only question left wasn't if it would fall apart, but how fast. I started my new job the following Monday. Competitor company, regional vice president of operations, larger territory, better pay, and something I hadn't realized I was starving for until it was offered: respect for experience. The CEO who hired me didn't talk in vague promises. He asked specific questions. He wanted to know how I rebuilt routing after penalties, how I stabilized vendors during shortages, how I handled recalls without blowing compliance windows. He didn't ask who I knew. He asked what I'd done. 3 weeks in, my phone started buzzing with numbers I recognized but hadn't saved. A vendor asked if I was still at my old company because their approvals weren't moving and nobody seemed to know who owned the decision. A former client mentioned communication issues and said they were quietly considering alternatives. The distribution world is smaller than people think. Reputation travels faster than press releases. Week 4, Drew texted me. This place is chaos. He said Tiffany scheduled a meeting to schedule another meeting. 3 accounts bailed that week. I told him I was sorry he was dealing with it. He told me not to be. He said everyone finally saw what I'd been holding together. Week 5. A supplier I'd worked with for 4 years emailed my personal account. They were struggling to get straight answers on forecasting and capacity planning and asked if I'd consult on the side. I declined, but suggested they reevaluate their partnerships. 2 weeks later, that same supplier announced they were reducing their contract with my old company by 40%. $1.8 million in annual business gone. It hit the weekly trade blast with polite wording about operational concerns. By month 2, the decay accelerated. Response time stretched from hours into days. Client complaints stacked up. The operational muscle memory I'd built over 6 years faded fast, and nobody left knew how to rebuild it. A regional restaurant chain I'd personally managed for 3 years sent out an RFP worth $3.2 million annually. They'd been locked in and happy. Now they were shopping. My new company submitted a proposal. We won. Their director of operations told me directly they wanted someone who could execute, not present. Month 3, the damage showed up in quarterly reports. My old region dropped from top performer to bottom third. Revenue down 18%. Customer satisfaction scores in the basement. Corporate brought in outside consultants. That's executive code for, we don't know how to fix this. The consultant report circulated internally. Someone sent it to Drew. Drew sent it to me. The subject line was long and boring. The conclusion wasn't. Operations collapsed after key personnel departure. The report also flagged ethical concerns. Janet's complaint triggered a secondary review. They found the pre-meeting HR email. They found Tiffany's threat. They found Vincent's reference intimidation. They found a pattern of promoting an unqualified family member over an experienced internal candidate without documented justification. Drew texted me. Vincent demoted. Tiffany stripped of authority. Can't fire the stepdaughter, but they made her irrelevant. 2 weeks later, I got one of those sterile corporate emails in my personal inbox. Ethics hotline case update closed. Allegations substantiated. Thank you for your cooperation. Do not discuss. No apology. Corporations don't apologize. I screenshot it, archived it, and went back to work. Month 5. My new company started aggressively recruiting in my old territory. We picked up 3 more major accounts that had left my former employer. One was the Colorado chain Tiffany took 3 days to handle. They told our CEO the switch was about execution speed and reliability. Code for, we're done waiting. Drew texted again in month 6. New director solid, cleaning house, Vincent's gone, early retirement package. Tiffany's still there, keeps her head down now. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I just kept building. Because the thing about stepping away from a mess is that if it was ever really your mess, it collapses without you. And if it wasn't, it never belonged to you in the first place. 8 months after I walked out, I got invited to speak at a regional food distribution summit in Denver. The topic was operational resilience, how systems fail when leadership confuses authority with competence. My CEO encouraged me to accept. He said rooms like that mattered, not because of ego, but because people listened when results followed you in. I agreed, booked the flight, and didn't think about who else might be there. Thursday evening, I walked into the hotel lobby cafe and saw Vincent across the room. He was standing near his company's booth crew, thinner than I remembered, more gray at the temples, the confidence dialed down to something brittle. He saw me, did a double take, and looked away like pretending would make me disappear. I ordered coffee and took a seat. A few minutes later, he drifted over like gravity pulled him. He said my name like we were old friends and told me he heard I was doing well. I said I was speaking the next morning. He nodded too fast and said we should talk about what happened. I said nothing. He tapped his fingers on the table and said he made mistakes, that Tiffany wasn't ready, that it should have been more gradual. Then he said I didn't have to make it so difficult, that I could have helped her succeed instead of watching her fail. I told him I helped exactly as much as I was contractually obligated to help. Professional courtesy is a two-way street, and he burned it when he promoted someone with 3 months of experience over someone with 6 years. He said it wasn't personal. I told him everything is personal when it's your career. He said the region was stabilizing now. I told him good because it took a lot of work to fix what he broke. He said I wasn't blameless. I told him I never claimed to be, but I wasn't responsible for his decisions either. That's when a woman stepped up beside us, introduced herself as Meredith, the CEO of Apex Distribution, and said she'd been following my work. She asked if I'd be interested in consulting opportunities. I said yes. She handed me her card and said she'd be at my presentation in the morning. Vincent stared into his coffee like it had personally betrayed him. Friday morning, the room was packed. My presentation landed, the questions were sharp, the conversation was real. Meredith took notes in the third row. Afterward, people lined up to connect. The networking reception that evening was louder, looser, industry people trading stories and cards. Vincent and Tiffany were there too, hovering at the edges of conversations, like they didn't quite belong anymore. Vincent watched me talk with Meredith and two other executives for a while, his posture tightening with every laugh that wasn't his. Then he snapped. He walked over and interrupted, voice too loud, accusing me of making indirect accusations in my presentation. I said I made observations based on experience. If he heard accusations, that was on him. Meredith asked him to step back. He pointed at me and said I sabotaged an entire region on my way out. Before I could answer, someone asked Tiffany how the transition was going. She tried to smile. Vincent jumped in to speak for her, said she was doing exceptional work and turning things around. The executive looked at Tiffany directly, waiting for her to answer. Tiffany swallowed and said it out loud, the truth she'd been choking on for months. She said, "I didn't sabotage anything." She said she just wasn't ready. Then she walked away. The room went quiet in that special way where reputations change. Vincent stood there frozen, jaw working, no words coming. Meredith told him he should leave. He did, fast, eyes down. Drew found me near the exit and said it was legendary. I told him I didn't plan it. That made it better. I stayed another hour, made connections, built something that didn't require me to explain myself. When I left the hotel, the air felt lighter. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Some people lose power and call it sabotage. Others lose the person holding everything together and finally see the cracks. I didn't destroy anything. I stopped propping it up. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe. It helps us bring you more of the ones that tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable.